So now, given the introduction, the release of all the info in regards to the new heavy fighter, the Scorpius, do I think that I'm going to get it over, say, something like the Vanguard? And at face value, it kind of looks like an easy choice, right? Because you go, oh yeah, it's got that big alpha, it's a hard hitter, you know. It looks really good, right? It looks really good, and so does the F8 Lightning, right? These two look like absolutely fantastic fighters, and the truth is that in a weird way, because of how Star Citizen is built, and because of how, you know, the ideas around Star Citizen and how things were going to work, even from the earliest days of the game, in a weird way, it kind of put Pirates one step ahead of the game. It gave us a series of harsh realities that we had to deal with from the very beginning. It gave us a point of view, an outlook on things that really the larger community, I think, lacked. And in a weird way, our peculiar way of looking at ships and things in the Star Citizen universe has, in effect, you know, it has paid off. And there's a lot of people now who are having to kind of adjust to this reality, whereas for Pirates, it was always built into us from the very beginning. Now you might be saying, you know, yeah, sure, what are you talking about? But if think about it, from the very, very beginning of Star Citizen, what has been the reality for Pirates? One, you're going to need a ship with long range, right? You're going to need a ship with a long range. Two, you're going to need to be able to carry cargo. Now that depends. You know, that one is someone around has got to be able to carry cargo, whether it's a Caterpillar, whether it's Cutlass, you know, whether it is any number of ships out there. Someone's got to have cargo capacity. Otherwise, what are you going to steal, right? Unless you steal the entire ship and fly away with it. That's a possibility. But, you know, we knew we needed that. If you got to board a ship, well, I need to basically bring armor with me. I need to bring different types of guns. I might need this type of grenade, that type of grenade, this type of armor, that type of armor. I don't know what I'm dealing with, right? And I'm going to be striking at targets of opportunity, so I have to kind of keep my options open, right? These are all the realities that we have kind of had to deal with from the very beginning. So, whereas, you know, and we've talked about this in the past, how Arena Commander and the ship hype that was built up out of Arena Commander kind of polluted the community's point of view. It kind of turned the community and it said, like, here's a great ship, here's another great ship, here's another great ship. And people were going like, ooh, that's the fighter, ooh, that's the next fighter, oh man. And they started going after these things, whereas Pirates were going in a different direction. Because we were thinking about, hey, if I get a Vanguard, you know, just to use the Vanguard as an example, that ship's range goes up to 459 million kilometers with a Sparkfire quantum drive. Definitely not the fastest quantum drive out there. I think from Olisar to Microtech is a 13-minute trip on that quantum drive. But if you think about it from a pirate point of view, let's say you're operating from Pyro. You may not always be able to get to Grim Hex, and even if you can get to Grim Hex, people are going to start to know, hey, if you're looking for pirates, they're all going to be hanging around Grim Hex. Delamar isn't there, so it's not a 50-50 proposition. You're not exactly sure where the pirate's going to go, and there is the possibility that they could be tracking you throughout the star system. But if you think about something like a Gladius, which is, you know, a very popular fighter, and I believe the most efficient quantum drive that you can put on the Gladius, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below with the correct figures. I was looking at this on Urkel earlier, so I may have gotten one or two things wrong, but the Vulcan is currently the most efficient quantum drive that you can put on a Gladius, and so it'll make the same trip from Olisar to Microtech in about 13 minutes, plus or minus a few seconds, roughly about the same time as the Vanguard, but it won't have enough fuel to make the return trip. It only gets 96 million kilometers out of its small fuel tanks. And that's, you know, there's so much when you look at something like the F8 Lightning, and you look at something like the Scorpius, and there's so much, to look at there, and just say, hey, that looks like a hard-hitting ship. That looks like a pretty damn good ship. And yeah, you know what? The small modules, maybe there's some limitations here, but one of the limitations that we really didn't talk about before was the limitation of the fuel tanks, which are also small. Something like the Vanguard is the only heavy fighter that, even despite its weaponry, being the way that it is, it's still the only fighter with all medium modules. It's the only one that goes the distance, right? And what good is a fighter if it can't get to the battle? And that's that's kind of, it's that practicality aspect of it that ultimately it kind of makes us kind of pull back from these fighters. And sure, some people will buy them and eventually fly them. I mean, the F-8 Lightning is obviously going to be a ways off, but Scorpius will probably come in much sooner, hopefully, fingers crossed, for those who own it. And people will fly that. But I think that when we get down to the point when CIG puts Pyro into the game, and we're now transitioning between the two, and based on Tony Zurevek's video, which I kind of blazed through earlier today, with freight and things like that starting to move through the star system at a later date in the future, going into Stanton, striking, stealing cargo, bringing it back, things like that, you're going to need a fighter that has the range to do that. And that's, kind of like with the Vanguard, you don't have to go all the way down to the Sparkfire. You can go middle of the road and you can still get 200 million kilometers in decent speed out of your quantum drive. And that is going to be something that can get you from Pyro to Stanton and Stanton back to Pyro, even with a little fighting in between. And that's really that's a really hard proposition to push away. Even something like the Cutlass, the lowly Cutlass, which is still the best starter ship in the game for anyone, no matter, unless you're specifically going for a career-based ship like mining or data running or, salvage, whatever. If you're going for a general purpose ship, I would still argue that the best starter ship in the game is still the Cutlass. And the Cutlass pretty much has the base range of the Vanguard, not quite so much, but it's still way up there, and it can carry cargo. And so that's kind of why we kind of gravitate towards these ships. Now, there is a counter argument to this, and there is a very valid counter argument to this, because it's one of the areas that shockingly CIG has not gone into a lot of detail. We just saw that video with Tony Zurevek talking so much about quantum and how they're building the economies and the supply and demand of, the Stanton system and eventually the Star Citizen universe. But there's one system that CIG has really not delved into at all, and that is grades of components. So if you think about a traditional MMORPG, you get your white item, then your green, then your blue, then your purple, then your orange or gold, your legendary, and it just kind of goes up through grades. Each battle axe, each shield, each helmet, whatever, it can be the same item level, but its quality and the power that it bestows upon you can be vastly different. And that's one of the areas that CIG has really not gone into any depth over, is component grades. We haven't seen this yet. We haven't seen a single item come into Star Citizen that represents a higher grade that isn't, let's say, a greater size, like a size 1 shield compared to, or a small shield compared to a medium, or a size 1 gun compared to a size 2. You can say that those are grades, but what I'm talking about is variants of existing size 1 weapons that are much better, or variants of existing, small quantum drives that are just far more fuel efficient. We do know a little bit about subcomponents and system modifications, but when I say a little bit, I mean a very little bit. So it's possible that there could be an even greater amount of depth to explore in terms of, item quality, output, these sorts of things that we can get out of our quantum drives our shields, our weapons. And that's, once again, that's an area that we really haven't explored in Star Citizen. But when you think about it from a pirate point of view, if that exists, if we take that Gladius that can only get about 96 million kilometers out of its quantum drive and its fuel tanks, even if you double it and you put it up to, almost 200 million kilometers, you're still like in a universe governed by those rules, then you're almost going to get 1,000 out of a Vanguard, right? So you don't really, you change the numbers, but you don't really change the equation, if you understand what I'm saying, right? You don't change the essential mathematics of the situation. So that's really kind of, I think that, the way that pirates were introduced to the game and the practical realities that they had to deal with, it kind of gave them one step ahead. It gave them an advantage where, they were kind of going, hey, I need a ship that can do this thing, but it also needs to be able to do this thing, and the other thing too, and it's got to have range. And facing those realities very early on, I think that was one of the big drivers that kind of pushed a lot of interest into things like the Constellation and ultimately like the Corsair, like the Mercury Star Runner. And you're seeing a lot of pilots out there who have stepped up to these ships, who now love these ships. And I can see occasional uses for something like a Vanguard, and certainly for something, like the Scorpius or like the F8 Lightning. But the problem is when it comes right down to it, if you're out there and you're having to constantly go from one system to another, if you're constantly chasing goals and objectives, rather than just kind of staying in one place and farming up reputation, doing missions for this faction and the next faction, if you're really kind of out there in the universe, it really kind of chips away a lot of these superfluous things. And so, do I think that I'm going to get one of these ships? I don't think so. Even my Vanguard, I would honestly say, is still up in the air. I might change my mind during the course of this sale, but the problems with the Vanguard are, they're obvious. Like, there's strengths, and we've talked about these strengths at length, but there are also limitations. And I'm not just talking about, the nose guns could be changed for gimbal. Like, you make a little mini quad turret on the nose, which I think they should still do, at the very least. But, maybe some, with the nose gun, the cannon that hangs underneath, some more variety there. Maybe change it to, you can put a gimbal size 4, a fixed size 5, or maybe a dual size 3 turret that hangs underneath there. That could be interesting as well. There's a lot of things that you can do to kind of open up the doors without, I think, really changing the power equation too much, which is probably why CIG is very, reluctant to make changes to the Vanguard. That, with its, it's like the advantages that we've spoken of, I think could possibly kind of push things a little too far in CIG's eyes. And once again, we haven't seen the armor manifest itself in the game as well. So that is another thing that could change, and make the Vanguard a much more attractive option in a lot of people's eyes. But I think that at the end of the day, it is still probably going to be things like the Corsair that take up a lot of my interest and a lot of my time, just because they're going to be so convenient to use across the universe. And ultimately, that's what Star Citizen is, right? It's a universe. It's not just Stanton. It's not just Pyro. It's going where you need to go, or sometimes going where you want to go, and being able to do that, having the freedom to do that. It would be kind of like playing a traditional MMO and your character gets to the point where they can unlock a mount, and you say, I don't need the mount because I only hang around the starter area, so I don't need that. And you could be the king of the starter area, but there's a big, huge, wide universe out there for you to explore, and you're just not going to do it because you're like, I don't want to take that next step. And at the middle of the road in those ships, we've highlighted so many of them that are, I believe, very solo pilot friendly, and ultimately I think that's where this is going to go, right? I would love to see more heavy fighters with some more interesting options. I fully encourage CIG to redouble their efforts in this field. I would like to see a combat variant of the Apollo. I would like to see what heavy fighter Drake threw at the UEE, which was obviously, as it always is in the lore, rejected out of hand. I want to see what those things, could bring to the table. I'm very interested, but for right now, the best pirate fighters still aren't fighters.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.